can't overstate just showing up and then doing it and doing it consistently. I said that's when the magic happens, and it's not unlocked by this workout regime or that workout regime unless you have specific goals.
I'm Annemarie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hot Flash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Annemarie.
Welcome to the Hot Flash Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Annemarie McQueen, founder of Hot Flash Inc. I am speaking to another dude today. I've been trying to get some men in the conversation. I think we need men. I think they bring things down a notch and they add some gravitas sometimes. And I just like to have them in the conversation. I was very happy to come across Dr. Stuart Phillips on Instagram. He's a university professor in the Department of Kinesiology and a member of the School of Medicine at McMaster University, my alma mater. I'll probably tell him that. I'm sure he won't be that interested. He is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Skeletal Muscle Health. Dr. Phillips' work centers on the interaction of exercise, physical activity, aging, and nutrition in skeletal muscle and body composition. He has been paying attention to the menopause space. He has taken on some of the big names, and he's just not afraid to call out what he sees as nonsense. So we're going to just speak to him in very clear, simple language to clear up some of the things that I know you are struggling with because I'm struggling with them. I'm a lifelong exerciser, and I have felt demoralized in the last 6 to 8 months with everything that's being thrown at us. I think I've spoken about it on here before. I feel like there's a bar and it's just continually moved and I will never be able to reach it. And I'm probably going to tell that to Stewart as well. Thanks for tuning in.
Has your doctor told you that you're too young for perimenopause? You just don't feel like yourself? You are not alone. Perimenopause can start earlier than you think. That's why MenoLab is here, to support you with a range of products and the information you need to confidently speak up and get the care you deserve. They also offer science-backed products like their bestseller, MenoFit, a probiotic designed to help relieve symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats and more, all while supporting your overall health and wellness. Don't settle for less. Visit MenoLabs and get the support you need today. Right now, they're offering our Hot Flash Inc. listeners 20% off using code HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. Now for the small print, this statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We've been chatting a little bit. I told you that I went to McMaster. I'm just always so excited.
Yeah.
But you were at Mac, but you were one of the smarty science people. I went there for something that it's not known for.
Yeah, I don't know about the smarty part. Because sort of I played rugby and maybe worked a little bit harder than the average, but sure.
So I came across you on Instagram and I was so happy. You were actually commenting on a menopause doctor and something a menopause doctor had said. And then I started scrolling through and I thought, oh my God, this guy, like, I'm so happy to find you. Because first of all, I run Hot Flash Inc. I'm a journalist. I based it on evidence, experience, and expert opinion because I felt setting out that there's some things that evidence hasn't explained or hasn't explained yet. Human experience is valid, and experts, doctors know things they see clinically that they don't, you can't always explain. But this space has gotten so crazy, and as a lifelong exerciser and fitness fan, I have become extremely demoralized myself in the last 6-8 months, I would say. I don't know which way I am going, up or down. And I'm someone who's loved, I gotta say, we all didn't lift weights. We were cardio people. I was there. The gym was at Jackson Square doing 90 minutes of Stairmaster. And I was
probably good life fitness.
Yeah. So, but then I've started lifting weights, but then it's just like, it's never enough.
Yeah.
The bar is always being moved. I've been chasing it my whole life. You don't even want to go to a yoga class because are you wasting your time? You don't even want to go to a spinning class because it's stupid. So I thought I would just start out by asking you, what do you see when you look at this space and what women are hearing? Like what's your impression? Let's just start there.
Yeah. So, the traditional disclaimers. I'm not a physician. I don't prescribe advice, and so I just try to convey information as somebody with a PhD and now almost 30 years of being in the business, so to speak, of we study skeletal muscle in my group. As a result, we're in the Department of Kinesiology. We use exercise as a stressor to understand what's going on. But like you, I'm a lifelong, I played all kinds of sports, passionate advocate for exercise and the health benefits that it brings. And there's really been over the course of my career a huge advent of understanding what exercise can do. And I still to this day would say it's the most powerful lifestyle habit that you can adopt to, forget it. There's a slew of benefits, and it's not just your heart, your lungs, your muscles, it's lots and lots of stuff. So from the outside of the fishbowl and as a man looking into particularly the menopause space, and women's fitness and wellness, I would say in general, it's really confusing. And I think that's a function of social media replacing sort of, I'll call it more traditional, and you might argue pedantic, lay press articles, and certainly a long ways away from what academics would call evidence-based advice as far as, this is what we know, because, social media has created a home for a lot of people to become um, experts and offer advice, and advice and influence are, conflated with followers. And so it's, as you said, it's confusing and demoralization. I can definitely understand confusion and a little bit of, I hate to say this, there's a little bit of shaming of certain types of exercise. You just said, don't do yoga. Like, what's that good for? And I'm like, it's good for tons of things, but not everybody is going to have a medal thrown over their head and is trying to make the next Olympics, or trying to crush some 24-hour race or a CrossFit or something. And if you are like I applaud. But most of us mere mortals just trying to do the best we can. And that then makes it a pressure cooker for some just well, I don't know what the kind word is, but some really bizarre advice that I think is definitely not evidence-based.
Okay, so what are some of the more bizarre things that you have seen?
Oh, where to start? So some common narratives, and because we study muscle, one of the things that's obligatorily part of our sort of lexicon of exercises that we study is resistance training and weightlifting. And in addition to aerobic training, has really undergone a renaissance of understanding of what it does for health. And I think people used to think it was aerobic was here and all the benefits were aerobic related, and nothing like resistance training. And you said yourself, when you went through university, and it's still pretty much the same. Females up in the aerobic gallery, treadmill, stair climber, etc., and guys down lifting weights. Now it's changing. I see a lot more women lifting weights, and I think that practice has been normalized. But the narrative that weightlifting is only really good for you if it is heavy weights, and the crew that's out there is LHS, so lift heavy shit.
Mhm.
And if you don't lift heavy shit, then essentially you're shamed into using mamby-pamby weights or that sort of thing. Now, I need to admit, if you're doing arm curls with a pen, not really resistance training. So something that's heavy and challenging, but certainly, the need to lift heavy is not true. There's lots of health benefits associated with lifting lighter weights. The workout still needs to be challenging, just like any workout. Hopefully, it pushes you somewhere. But the sufficiency of lifting weights to get all the health benefits we know are associated with weightlifting, and that includes bone mineral density improvements, that includes muscular strength, that includes improvements in physical functioning, reduction in risk for type 2 diabetes come with lifting lighter weights. And so, that's been a narrative I've tried to push back against and just, here's evidence. I may be idealistic in thinking that presenting evidence will win, but, uh, 70 some odd thousand followers at a time, I think maybe at the converted.
Well, one thing you've said that I think is so effective is you need, like, the most important thing is to be working out. So the
Yes.
heavy narrative
Yeah.
prevents people. Also, I've had a number of friends injure themselves by this lift heavy narrative. They're lifting too heavy.
Yeah.
Where I feel like we're more easily injured when we're at this age. I don't know if that's true. That's something that I want to ask you.
Yeah.
I don't know. If
Yeah.
someone's on social media is telling you to lift heavy and you go in the gym, you don't really know what you're doing.
I mean, I think we can all appreciate it. I'll be frank. So, the data on reporting injuries that occur with resistance training, with lifting, is really poor. So we have a really poor understanding of actually how many people get hurt doing this. But it's definitely true, and I got lots of colleagues in bio. The heavier the load that you're going to lift, the risk, at least, that you're undertaking, particularly if you're not sure how to do things, it can be much greater, and the consequences are much greater. It's not just, oh, I feel sore. It's, something popped. I did something, and then, forget about you can't lift. It's like you can't move. So there are a lot of people, and I need to be clear. If you like to lift heavy weights and you're good at it and you've got instruction, you know how to do it, like, power to you. I'm not saying don't do it, but I do think that there's a degree of understanding with weightlifting that requires either a little bit of instruction or going on YouTube and looking and seeing how it's done, asking for help. And people find it intimidating. And I need to acknowledge, and women in particular, because, it's a quote unquote man's domain. And oftentimes you're surrounded by people, weight belts and the whole kind of thing. It's not an atmosphere that's conducive to getting women to do it. So I have a graduate student, a PhD student, who started a program at our local student gym called Women on Weights. And it's basically, so there's a women's only workout space, and it's wholly designed for every woman, young woman on campus to learn, if she would like, how to lift weights. And it's a different environment on our campus now. There are, it's very multi-ethnic, very diverse, and so there are some women who are literally touching a weight for the very, very first time, and so some instructions required. But the need to lift heavy, no, it's not there. And all the benefit, you said consistency, right? And it's so unsexy, right? I'm like, just show up. I tell that to students all the time, and they go, yeah, sure. I'm like, no, I can't overstate just showing up and then doing it and doing it consistently. I said, that's when the magic happens, and it's not unlocked by this workout regime or that workout regime unless you have specific goals. So,
Okay. Another thing that I hear, there's two things people will pipe in when I talk about this. It's always get it, you need a trainer, which I really find very, what's the right word? Not very many people can afford a trainer.
it's
Like,
gating.
that's such an elitist.
You're effectively gating an activity and
Wow.
relating.
Like, are you ever? That is
Yeah.
such an expensive thing. And of course, so many trainers are on selling their services. I get it.
Sure. Yeah.
And then someone will always pipe in and say progressive load. And I
Yeah.
understand that just means things getting heavier over time. But
Yes.
when you're a person who's not an expert, that just sounds very, very intimidating and like you don't know what it is. And so
Yes.
I just wondered if you could explain it to us, and like how the mere average person can wrap their head around it. And is it vital?
Yeah. So a comment on your you need a trainer comment. As you would know, in Hamilton, it's a very diverse city. The east end of the city, there's still two steel mills, and there are socioeconomic differences between that end of the city and this end of the city. So, I'm always aware when I'm talking to the general public in this city that I could be talking to somebody who lives in Ancaster and Dundas. The neighborhoods don't matter, but it's quite affluent. And I could be talking to somebody from the northeast end of Hamilton who, the notion of A, going to a gym, and then B, being able to afford a trainer, it's not just gating. You're essentially ruling out that as a means to engage someone in the behavior. So, you got to be aware who you're talking to. And I think it's a little bit of sort of uh, upper SES, Caucasian oriented. This is how life is, and I'm like, it's not like that for everybody. So move on from that. Just a little narrative there.
And I just interrupt for a minute. I live in the Middle.
Go for it.
I live in
Yeah,
Abu Dhabi, and it always
yeah,
makes my heart just soar because there are so many different groups of people living here and
yeah,
all different socioeconomic levels, and all
yes,
go out at dusk on a boiling hot summer day, and there'll be people just working out because they put equipment sort of out in the public, and you'll see people
yeah,
working out and doing calisthenics because they like to move their bodies, and that always makes
yes,
me. I'm like, that is just as important as get a
yeah,
trainer. That is, they're
yeah,
doing it, right? So I just wanted to say that.
yeah. No. But illustration of, if we're really interested in, sort of helping everybody, quote unquote, then we want to remove as many barriers as possible. And I think that, your example is a great one. Yeah. Why not just use the bars in a park to, try and do a chin up, or, and so there's all kinds of ways of sort of breaking that down. So, I mean, I think the barriers that you're talking about, particularly for women, are being able to simplify things. And so the progressive overload, sort of, which is, yes, used all the time, is the concept that I could be lifting, say, a 5 pound weight, and then the first time I do it, lifting that 10th repetition, maybe on an arm curl or a push over my head, I'm like, that's tough. But then you get stronger, and instead of at the 10th repetition it being tough, you're like, oh, there's no problem. I can lift that. So the next step is to pick up the 7.5 pound or the 10 pound weight, and progress that way. And so, the notion is that the stimulus has to keep getting a little bit bigger. It doesn't always have to get heavier. It could be that, you can do 7 repetitions, and then all of a sudden you find the seventh one easy. And the next step is to push yourself to do 12 or 15. So progression is always the idea that the stimulus has to get a little bit heavier, or you're doing more. Or if you're only working out one day a week, you work out 2 times a week. So there's all kinds of ways to progress. And people talk about overload as it only being load is the progression, but progression happens in lots of different dimensions of it. It would be like, the person who's never really walked goes out for a walk and does it one day a week, and then all of a sudden I go, oh, that's pretty easy. So you're like, okay, can you walk further? Can you walk faster? Or are you going to walk twice a week? And the exact same analogy applies to lifting a weight. And so, you know, uh, progressive overload is a cool sciencey term, but that's essentially, it means making the stimulus a little bit harder as you begin to adapt and get fitter, or in this case, stronger.
Okay. And how much is enough? How much is too much? How do you measure that? Because we uh all grew up being told we weren't doing ever enough. We weren't,
Right.
and that's how I feel. Like, why I just never felt
Yes.
like I was exercising enough. I wasn't eating the right way. I wasn't thin enough. Blah blah. I'm not complaining. That's just the way
Yeah.
it was. How
Yeah.
what do we do? Because this is confusing too. Because on one hand, people are saying, rest, and you've been working out too much, and your perimenopause is hard because you've been under eating and over exercising, and
Yeah.
it's like lift heavy, and yeah, you can see.
Yeah, it's confusing, right? And I mean, so some fundamental truisms. So we always still have, and I go back to this, the physical activity guidelines, and it says 150 minutes, so 2.5 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity. That's the aerobic part of it. And I think most people don't know that it also says 2 days a week of strengthening activities, and it gives a variety of them. Not all of them, I would say, are truly strengthening, but yeah, let's forgo that for now. So that's sort of the goal, right? And people say, "Oh, I'm not really doing that." And the point to make in all of this is that those are the arguments that would sort of take you to the top of, health, and if you like. And so if we look at health as the inverse of risk, so risk goes down and then it flattens out. And the flat part of the curve is that's where the 150 minutes is. That's where the 2 days a week is. So if you're doing one day and everybody goes, well, I can't really handle two for a number of reasons, time, my life, my kids, I feel like hell. The zone of chaos, menopause, right? Like
Thank you.
I
Yes.
married my wife, I see it. I'm like, chaos is probably an understatement, as far as I can see. So, let's give yourself a break. And the point I always make to people is that it's when you go from nothing to something that you're on the big steep part of the curve in terms of your risk goes down for just about everything. So the benefit goes up. If we always keep our eye and one eye squarely focused on the scale, you can forget about that, because exercise is not a great, shifter of weight. It's a part of the answer, but it's a lot more related to diet. And so I try and sort of, break it down for people. I'm like, so what do you do? They're like, well, I walk, about 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day. I do it 3 times a week. So I'm like, yeah, it's 60 minutes. That's amazing. And then I go to the gym and I do this, or I go and lift this, or I take a class or something. And I'm like, yeah, that's resistive in nature. And I'm like, you're already so much better than most people who are doing little to nothing. And just appreciate that some days and some weeks, and maybe even for months at a time, the doing of something is so much better than the doing of nothing. And, everybody has a hustle lifestyle these days and wants you to sort of, you need to be an achiever. And, so that's like, it's not only 150, it's like actually the curve keeps going up, the risk keeps going down, and it does, but only slightly. If you do
Oh,
more. Right. Yeah. And look, it really plateaus off, right? And there is still a sort of a downward trajectory, but it's the analogy I like to use is as if, so you soak a cloth in water, and if you haven't exercised, you're the soaked cloth. And then you're like, I do 1 day a week, and look at all the water and the benefit that came out. And I do two, and I do three. Now, if you're doing more, you're twisting the cloth pretty hard, and it's little drips that are coming out. So it's the dose response curve. You've got all the benefits, you've got all the reduction in risk. And so, once you start, you're on the steep part of the curve. And so 1 day a week of lifting, 1 day a week of doing aerobic, you're on that steep part. 2 days a week, 2 days a week. Now you're starting to sort of really see the benefits. But now it's starting to curve off. And so you don't need to smash it 5 days a week. You don't need to do X, Y, and Z. You don't need to do 11 push-ups, which is, I saw recently as sort of the demarcation. It's a recommended level. And somebody, I said to my wife, 11 push-ups. She goes, yeah, that's ridiculous. She goes, and she tries. She goes, I can do 7. I'm like, it's pretty good. And I mean, what is the difference between 4 and 7? Probably minuscule. That's the standard that was published. It's from an organization whose meeting I'm going to go to in 2 weeks, the American College of Sports Medicine. But it doesn't say 9 is, you're a loser. 5, forget about it. Or 11 push-ups on your knees is, well, boo-hoo, who are you? The result is actually that you're a heck of a lot better off than somebody who can do none. And I think that's the big takeaway.
okay. Can you just, in your most simple terms, explain why muscle? I know this is obvious and this is your work, but why does
Sure.
muscle help? Why does muscle help your brain and your heart? Like, what is the function and your bones? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think muscle's been underappreciated as a tissue of health, and until recently, and I'm like you. Um, so so there's probably a number of things. So first of all, muscle is the largest site of glucose disposal, so blood sugar. So the more of it you have, and the more what we call metabolically active it is, it reduces your risk for type 2 diabetes. And, we know that that's a big issue. It's also when you really boil down all of your body composition to the tissues that really contribute to your metabolic rate, and people call it resting or basal metabolic rate, which is sort of like your daily thermostat, how many calories you burn and everything. It comes down to your muscle because there's so much of it, and your liver. And not that other tissues don't contribute. Everybody goes, well, your heart's beating all the time. I'm like, you're right, but it's tiny, right? Um, and your brain, and obviously your brain's contributing, but your muscle, there's so much of it. And particularly if you're active, then your muscle is a big consumer of energy. And so, as we age and that goes down, that's why our energy requirements go down. And so, you need to keep that as much as you do. Uh, Women, we know, particularly going through menopause, they experience this decline in estrogen, and bone is the tissue that suffers as a result of that. But, the great way to offset that is to be active and perform resistance exercise, but also jumping and impact exercises, because muscle pulls on a tendon, tendon pulls on a bone, and that's what your muscle senses, excuse me, your bone senses and lays down calcified tissue and preserve your bone mineral density. It's not perfect, but it's the difference between, bone mineral density doing this and doing this, right? So,
Yeah.
all of those are functions of muscle. And the relationship, as you mentioned, between cognitive function and everything else this is my take. I don't know if this is true or not, but I always say to people, the tests of physical function that we use, like grip strength, and it seems so benign, like what can grip strength tell you, or what can maximum exercise like VO2 max tell you? And I'm
Toe
like,
strength.
well,
That's the one I heard
yeah.
lately, toe strength.
So it's this talking through nerves
Mm.
to muscle, making them contract. Your heart has to be in good shape. Your lungs have to be in good shape. Your nerve has to be in good shape. Pulling on a bone, your bone has to be in good shape. So it crosses multiple physiological systems. And if something is not quite right, and there's the weakest link in that pathway, which crosses all kinds of things, it'll get exposed. And so, people with weaker grip strength or the weakest grip strength, we know they're in trouble. And it's associated with lots of other things like cognitive decline. And I don't know that it's causative, but I certainly would say that, people who are on the lower end of physical activity, who don't have great nutrition, et cetera, as they age, we talk about declines like this as opposed to, like a flat decline. And people who are physically active, they're like this. Aging's going to get you, right? Like we can't turn back the clock. So it's really, this as opposed to this. And
Right.
the matching these days, the cool language is people talk about longevity. And I'm like, living long is great. We all want to do that. But what we want to have too is to match our health span, the period of our life where we're in good health. And, to me, physical mobility is a core component of that, as close as possible to our lifespan.
Yeah.
And there's no drugs for that. There's only activity and a good diet, probably a decent sleep, and a few other things, and you're off to the races.
When it comes to bone strength,
Mm,
um, like there are many women around the world who have bone loss, but they don't have fractures because they're active. Can you speak
yeah,
to me about that? Because I think also we see the space that we're just losing our bones and we hear about breaking hips and whatever. But
yeah.
and it's always a big cell hormone therapy, which I do want to talk to you about. But just
Yeah.
from what you've seen, is hormone therapy essential, or can you not have strong bones with activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quick takeaway is that hormone therapy, of course, it's an indication. Bone mineral density is an indication for hormone therapy. It works well. Got lots of other pharmaceutical treatments for low bone mineral density and for offsetting that, particularly around menopause. Everything that I would tell you is, sort of lifestyle related. I'm not a rheumatologist. I don't actually study bones, so I'm passively absorbing
Yeah.
information from other people. But, from my perspective, uh, when we talk about exercise, it's not just that, if you're concerned about your bone health, and of course, if you are, then that's a big deal and a reason to do it. But it's sort of the ripple effect on, you name it. I mean, if you'd have told me 10 years ago that engagement and resistance training has profound effects on anxiety and depression, I'd have been like, whatever. But here we are 10 years later, and there's two meta-analyses which show that it does. And I'm like, wow, like, who knew? And you talk to people who, the gym is my therapy session and everything. I'm a little bit like that, put my
Me too.
music on and
Yeah.
love to do it. So, I mean, we're discovering benefits all the time. Is it necessary, for hormone therapy for that? I don't know that I can answer that question, but I mean, clearly some women are, they're better off. And it's still the message that going into menopause, if you've built up that bank of bone and muscle, I would
Mm.
add too, you're in much better shape. And so, when does all the investment need to be done? Probably earlier than most women think,
Mhm.
in their 30s and particularly their 40s. And then, hang on for the ride pretty much.
Is it too late in your 50s?
Never. No, it's never too late. Particularly for muscle strength. And let's be clear too. I mean, part of the benefit of strength training is bone related. Not that it isn't, it is. But, if you're going to reduce your risk for a fall and a fracture, then make yourself stronger, make yourself able to react in those moments. And that's a measurement of power, like, moving quickly, which you can train. And it's actually specifically done with lighter weights because you're trying to emphasize it's almost as if you imagine there's a small weight and you're pushing it fast as opposed to a heavy weight and you're pushing it slow. That's a power maneuver as opposed to, sort of this type of thing. So from that standpoint, you're reducing your risk for a fracture, not related to your bone density, but related to your muscles and how well you can move.
Okay. And I saw you going after a pretty famous menopause doctor who was
Oh,
making claims about hormone therapy, estrogen, and muscle.
yeah,
I'm wondering, what is the evidence on that? Because we hear those claims all the time that it helps you build
yeah.
muscle. No.
There's no link. So, I mean, so two lines of evidence, and I just posted not 15 minutes before we got on the call here, on Instagram. This is a recent paper, really well done, looking at cross-sectional declines in muscle mass in women, and they had a group that were in the menopausal age range, so sort of 45 to 55, and they show this sort of little wobble in women's neuromuscular ability to generate force. And they say, look, something's happening in menopause. If you distill the whole group out, which goes from range 18 to 80, the biggest negative predictor of a decline in muscle function is still age. And I often point out to people, they talk about, the decade of perimenopause, 45 to 55. And I'm like, well, that's still a decade, and we know that muscle is lost at this rate. What you would expect to see is that the curve would, if estrogen loss and muscle loss happened, is that the curve would inflect around menopause, and it doesn't. So we've got population-based data on this. We've got longitudinal data on women that don't align with that model. And then we've also got hormone therapy data showing that it has no effect on muscle.
No
So there's
effect. No effect.
no direct effect, no you know, uh, you know, a lot of people have pointed this out to me, and I wouldn't dismiss it as a potential mechanism. So people have said, women have said to me, well, when I took estrogen, I got my life back. I
Mhm.
felt better, and I was able to do the things that I wanted to do. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to argue with that, right? Like, I understand.
Yeah.
And certainly that's a potential. And I said, but it's still a question, right? In other words, we don't have data that women who get on hormone therapy change their behavior around being able to do the health behaviors, you know. So is the hormone therapy an enabler of you being able to do this? It sounds great, and enough anecdotes and personal experience would suggest that that's what some women find, but there is no trial showing that that's true. And that, you know, so I'm just like, I get it, it's possible, but wouldn't that be an awesome study to have
Mm,
some great data? Stay tuned. It's definitely a possibility.
okay. So the claim that hormone therapy can help you build muscle in
Not true.
perimenopause and menopause.
Not true.
Okay.
No data on that.
That's interesting because you hear that almost daily.
I know. Yeah, I know, and it's frustrating. You know, again, I the reveal before the show was that my wife is a cardiovascular physiologist who studies this as well. There are some effects in the vascular system associated with hormone therapy. So if there's an effect, hypothesis that we have is it might improve blood flow. And so that might be a reason, but it's definitely not a hormone directly acting on a receptor in muscle. And there are estrogen receptors in muscle, but yeah, we don't see anything. And I can't see anything because I'd steal some very hardworking graduate students' thunder if I were to do it. But we have some data that strongly makes me think that what I'm saying is correct. In other words, estrogen trivial, if any, effect on skeletal muscle.
Okay. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about fascia.
Yeah, beyond what I passively you know, get from sitting in some symposia where I'm the muscle guy and the next guy is around fascia. I mean, I think that there's a big focus on fascia and connective tissue these days. Again, it's enjoying a huge renaissance because it sort of seems to be a site of it's kind of like a pinch point for a lot of people. There's a lot of issues that happen with fascia that a lot of therapists can manipulate, and you know, and I'm living experience and proof. There's one person I go to that I don't know what they do, but it's like some magic hands. Honestly, I come in, I'm like this, and then they do, and I'm like, oh my God, what was that? And then
Yeah.
afterwards, I'm like, holy cow.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I mean, what we do know around fascia is it's that thin layer of connective tissue that sort of shines across the top of the muscle. We'd probably get adhesions in there with age. Unfortunately, all connective tissue, not just the stuff in muscle, but the stuff between joints and everything, really difficult to heal it, particularly if once you've hurt it, because the blood flow to that tissue is remarkably poor.
Mm,
That's the case. The regeneration of the tissue once you damage it or age just, you know, it falls apart. Um, it's uh, it's so difficult. As I've said to many of my friends, they're like, you know, muscles, I said, I can help you with. Connective tissue, I can't. And I said, when I do find the answer, I'll join you from, you know, my resort in Tahiti and my private jet because it would be worth a lot of money, right? Bones, joints, it would be awesome.
oh yeah. You posted recently about inactivity causing pain in people as they
Yeah.
age. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So periods in activity, we're convinced, particularly in aging, are, you know, it's like the silent thief. And I know that I'm borrowing from other disease patterns, bone loss in particular for that one, but there's a real lack of appreciation, I think, for what even a short-term period of inactivity does to older people. the model we've sort of got, we draw curves where somebody's coming down and they're aging and they seem like they're doing well, but then they have a period of inactivity, and in a very short period of time, they go down, and the thought is that you recover, so you just sort of bounce back up. And the dirty secret is you don't. In fact, if you do anything, you have this period of inactivity and you migrate to a different curve. The problem is that that migration and that, hopping from one curve to another can be the equivalent of sort of 8 to 10 years of normal aging in maybe even as short as a 2, 3, 4 week period. And so if you're in hospital laying on, because the de facto treatment when you're in hospital, because people don't like you wandering around, because they where are you? You're a fall risk, all these sorts of things, is to lay in bed. And if you're so sick that you can't do anything other than lay in bed, I understand that. But then there needs to be an appreciation that on discharge, you really do need some form of physical therapy to kind of reclaim that lost function. And you might not be able to get the muscle back, even with some very aggressive work. But the loss in function and the loss in cardiovascular conditioning has a tremendous impact on your quality of life. And so I know you've survived a few winters here, so you'll know that old people, they get admitted to hospital for flu. They spend 4 days in hospital with respiratory distress. They come out, they're well enough to return home. They go back to their house. They look outside. It's freezing cold, it's raining, or it's snowing. I'm not going outside. And so they convalesce, and it's a little bit of a downward spiral. For you talk to geriatricians and they talk about people who have had a bad winter. And it's tough on older people. So yeah, we try to push to physicians to help them to understand the deconditioning that happens with just being on bed rest and during a hospital stay, which is, considered to be a normal part of aging. But I think you need to sort of educate people on what they need to do on the backside of that to try and get back some of what they've lost.
Okay. Okay. I have a couple of just quick things I'm just going to say to you that we hear all the
Sure.
time. Creatine.
It's on my supplement shelf, which is short. I use it these days. I know the muscle stuff, it's been around for a long time, very safe. I'm hedging. I have no data, or well, that's not true. I'd upset people saying there's no data. The data on the neural or the cognitive side of things is pretty thin these days. I think there's a lot more hype out there on social media than actual evidence, but I'm kind of banking on maybe that's pretty good for your brain.
Okay.
As you get older. It makes my supplement shelf, but don't expect miracles.
Branch chain amino acids. I
A
like to call them
complete
because. Yeah.
yes. Branch chain amino acids, so leucine, isoleucine, and valine, complete waste of money. Particularly to me, as I'm an advocate of eating slightly more protein than's recommended, but getting it through your diet, and supplements if you have to. So milk proteins, soy proteins, pea protein, I don't really care. But branch chains are inexpensive extravagance. Don't bother.
And protein. I mean, this protein push.
Yeah.
Everything has protein in it, and then inside the protein is more protein, and then it's wrapped in protein.
Yeah, it's like hysteria these days.
Yeah.
And I get a little bit of blowback because we study protein a lot, and we may have unwittingly contributed to the narrative that's important. I think the important message is the current levels that are recommended, which are usually about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And, I think most people work in kilos, but if you needed a translation, it's about 0.3 to 0.4 grams per pound. Are too low. We advocate for something that's at least 50% higher, so closer to about 0.5 grams per pound or 1.2 grams per kilo. And I like to try and get people as close to about 1.6, which is 0.7 grams per pound. So more protein than is recommended, but the real walkaway point is with a little bit of judicious planning, you can get that all from your diet. You don't need to use supplements. You don't need to chase these protein products, and just appreciate that, if there's a new protein product that has come out and it's like this is higher in protein, and it's usually, I've been where you are. I've never gone to a grocery store, which is something I usually try and do everywhere I visit. But, up one aisle, it's fruit and veg, so produce. Across the back, it's usually there's dairy, then meat, and then down the other aisle, it's usually bread or grain or something like that. The stuff in the middle, where all the cool, fancy new products are usually, if they're new, they're ultra processed products. And, if there's an enemy, in quotation marks, it's ultra processed foods. And so I like to say, stay away from those and try and get the majority of your nutrition, shopping around the outside of the grocery store and eating real food, which I think has been forgotten a little bit about, people talk about nutrition a lot. And I'm like, I don't know, to me, sitting down with people, with friends, and eating a good meal is, there's way beyond nutrition there.
Yeah.
So let's just say more protein than is recommended, more the more, the more, the more, and, sort of up and up and up. I just don't see the data for that.
Okay. Ozempic and muscle.
Yeah.
I've been on panels here with doctors who have said that there's a flip in the muscle loss on those drugs.
Yeah.
Can you just, is that
could be problematic. The usual, we've done work in the weight loss space, and we're trying to get some grants now to study the Ozempic induced or GLP-1 receptor agonist induced weight loss, for the main reason that it is so ridiculously good, in the sense that you lose a lot of weight. The usual rule is when your diet-induced weight loss is that 3/4 of the fat or the weight you lose is fat, and 1/4 is not fat, what we call lean mass. That lean mass is definitely muscle. It can be bone too, and I mean that's another argument. When you take Ozempic or semaglutide or one of these drugs, not all of them, they're a little bit different. About that ratio shifts, and about 40% of your weight loss can be lean, and so that's a lot of muscle tissue that you might give up, as well as bone. So the royal we, myself, a couple of colleagues have written several commentaries saying, for an older person, and I have docs who are friends and talk about giving this to people in their 60s and 70s even. We think that the weight loss in those older people could have consequences because of the loss of muscle that goes along with the loss in body fat as well. I think that's a concern. I think that the companies who sell the drugs also know that it's a concern. They passively acknowledge that it's an issue, but I can tell you that they're actively working on drugs that would counteract that, which suggests to me they know it's an issue. And, so the best pushback from a lifestyle perspective is definitely to eat a little bit more protein, but the really big, and I mean like way bigger than protein driver, would be to do something resistive and add load, because that's a really powerful stimulus to hang on to muscle. And I think on the backside of losing all of that weight, actually, you've been way better shape from a functional perspective too. So you can imagine the grant that we're writing to try and show that would be the
that's
case.
exciting.
So yeah, so stay tuned.
Okay, stay tuned for that. What is in your supplement shelf?
Oh yeah. Well, creatine, you've
Yeah.
already got that one. I don't live where you live, and so sunshine is in a little bit less supply. So vitamin D, particularly during the winter months. I'm about to come into, it's almost sunny today here, as you know, so we do get useful sunshine for about, I think, 6 to 7 months of the year. And then the other one is omega-3 fatty acids. You got to be a little bit choosy here, and it is a situation that you get what you pay for. So the more expensive brands that can guarantee that they're not oxidized are the ones that you really need to look out for. And yeah, I try and take about a gram a day. It's about half and half EPA, DHA.
And why do you take it?
I used to take it for heart health. I think
Mhm.
that's all a bunch of bunk now. To be honest with you, I take it again. I think there's a neural aspect to it. And there's some evidence, and I'll admit that it's weak, but for an anti-aging type effect. And that's I figure if you've got exercise dialed in, you've got diet dialed in. I'm not the best sleeper, but if you can get that on a regular basis, and you've got a good circle of friends, all of this anti-aging, these drugs, this drug, that drug, I'm like, I think
Yeah.
you've got a lot squeezed out of the benefits there. So I'll take that. And I'm fond of saying, everybody goes, I'm into lifespan. And I'm like, I have no interest in living to 120 and feeling like I'm 120. So, maybe I'll feel different when I'm 100. I don't know. But so, the physical function part to me is key and critical. So, and I think that's only ever going to come from lifestyle.
I feel like there's a lot of people in the longevity space who can't face that they're going to die and maybe aren't doing midlife reckoning. To
Absolutely.
be metaphysical about it. Like they're so
Yeah,
obsessive. Yeah, you feel the same.
I do. I'll mention it only in sort of general terms. I was invited to give a talk for some individuals, and I sort of showed up, and I was surprised who was there because there were some notable people that I would know, not, but from television and all this sort of stuff. And they were talking about longevity and all the things, and I was like an exercise and protein guy, and you could tell they thought, oh, this is sort of pedestrian stuff. And then they started shooting out some of the things that they were on, and I was like, I had no idea. I don't know, like they were drugs and all kinds of things. And I left. I went home. I said to my wife, she says, "Oh, how was it?" I said, "Well, it was really interesting. There were some pretty notable people there." I said, "But it was a lot of middle-aged white men who don't want to die." So,
I don't want to think even about die. They're not going to die. That's just how they're dealing with it. They're just not
Yeah,
going
no,
to
and
participate.
you could, yeah, it's a middle-aged, you get a sense of your own longevity, right? Once your parents have passed away, you go, well, shit, like I'm next, right?
Yeah.
And we're all gonna die. So I think the narrative I like to push is try and control as many of the variables as you can. All these drugs that people are microdosing and taking and everything else like that, I always come back with, where's the data? And they always say, oh, I can't wait for the human data. I'm just try this. And I'm like, okay.
Okay.
But if rats live longer and fruit flies live longer, then surely we're just the next evolution. And I'm like, I think we're a little more complicated than the rats and the fruit flies, but
What?
who knows?
To each his own. Okay. Words of
Yeah.
hope for women in perimenopause who are confused. Words, something to cling to from a
Um,
sober individual.
Yeah, so be as physically active as you can. If you're not doing something to maintain your strength, then I would start because that's going to go down. I think there is a bit of a decline that is tough to rescue and get back. Um, if you're the typical woman out there, at least in Canada and most parts of the world, you're going to live longer than your male partner, if you have a male partner. And unfortunately, the data are fairly grim, particularly in westernized countries, that women who outlive their partner, 80% of them spend that time in institutionalized care because it's tough for them to take care of themselves.
Right.
I think that's physical activity. And I think that the earlier you start that in life, it's like a compound investment. But my disclaimer is that menopause is a time of massive transition. I have no lived experience. I've only watched it vicariously through my partner. And it's definitely, deserving of the attention I think that it's getting. But don't feel bullied, if that's the right word, on social media to conform to something that, even the strongest women out there would have a hard time conforming to. And that's, redonkulous amounts of exercise. Absolutely, because the word need is used in reference to those types of exercise. And I can categorically tell you that that is not true.
Okay. That's really nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Annemarie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hot Flash Inc. Media.